Toronto Star. I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters.
Even those lucky enough to be able to work from home are finding this stressful and badly want their kids back in school. Trust me. I love my kids more than anything, but I'd send them to go study in Jake Paul's house if it meant I could have my mornings back.
That's John Oliver from Last Week Tonight, whose most recent episode had a segment on how the US is planning on reopening schools while the coronavirus surges there. He may be joking, but I think he perfectly captures the exasperation that many parents are feeling as we look for answers as to what is happening with our children and schools this fall. At every level, there are a ton of questions. Thankfully, we have Kris Rushowy joining us. She is a reporter in the Queen's Park Bureau for The Star, but prior to that, she was one of our education reporters, and she has been incredibly busy trying to figure out just what is going to happen in the fall. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Kris, I want to get to the latest at sort of every level of what we know right now, but let's just start off with the basics. How do you think parents are feeling about how the provincial government is dealing with September and school to come?
Well, there's still a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen in the fall. So the province has asked school boards across Ontario to look at 3 different models, to plan for 3 different models. So the one is, let's say the worst case scenario would be online learning only. Let's say if there's a surge in COVID cases and it's not safe for kids to go back to school. So they've asked boards to plan for that. And also the best case scenario, which would be kids in class full time with strict hygiene rules like regular hand washing and physical distancing, maybe even masks, and then a hybrid of the 2. So, I think right now parents are probably a little frustrated. There's not a lot of clarity as to what the situation is going to be. In fairness, nobody really knows because we don't know what's going to happen with the COVID cases. There's been some polling done for the Star and the Ontario Public School Boards Association, which does show that parents still have kind of mixed feelings about sending their kids back to school if they feel it's not really safe.
I'm exactly there. I have an 8-year-old who very much missed school when it shut down, and she's heading into grade 4. Now, I think that of the options, the key here is that hybrid one, where there's basically, the TDSB has already said that leaves parents choosing between work and kids, which is sort of the crux of this whole issue. What's going to happen with primary school? What's the plan right now?
So depending on the board, a lot of boards are looking at 2 days on, 3 days off, or 2 days on, a day of cleaning, that kind of thing. Some kind of hybrid model where there's alternating days on and days off. Other boards, the Toronto Catholic Board is also looking at alternate weeks. So kids would be in school 1 week and then learning remotely the next week. For high school students, they're looking at, it would basically be 2 courses at a time. So that's a little different. For primary students, though, the Toronto Public Board in particular has several different scenarios under the model. They're looking at hiring extra teachers to keep classes small. The province has suggested maybe about 15 kids. The Toronto Public Board is saying, look, if you want to do that, it's going to be thousands of extra teachers. We could also have from, let's say, junior kindergarten to grade 3, we could have 15 kids in a class because they're younger and maybe physical distancing would be a bit tougher. Kids who are in grades 4 to 8, maybe we could have 20 kids. They're a bit older. Maybe they could wear masks if we can't physical distance. Maybe they're a bit better about not sharing toys and things like that. So those are the options they're looking at. But certainly the hybrid model does pose the most problems for parents because it's what days are kids going to be at school? How do I care for them on the days that they're at home? What if I have to go back to work full time, or even if I'm working from home, how do I look after my kids, make sure they're doing their schoolwork and also do my own work?
This is exactly it. This is what I've been dealing with. I love my daughter, but she was at camp for last week and I was like, amazing, you're gone. So absence does make the heart grow fonder. Okay, so
it's been a long shutdown.
It really has. But Kris, I just want to ask this because I love the term. What's a quadmaster?
Quadmaster. Okay, so in high school, schools can be non-semestered. So that means kids take 8 courses throughout from September to June. They can be semestered. So the year is broken into 2 chunks and they take 4 courses at a time. And what some boards are looking at is the Quadmaster. So the Toronto District School Board is looking at this, where they take 2 courses at a time for roughly 2 months, like 45 days. It's a way to limit their contact with other people because they're only there for 2 classes. They would be there for a half day at each time. So it allows for 2 groupings of kids to go, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And it also limits the contact, so they wouldn't be having lunch together. There shouldn't be too much hallway movement. Cafeterias would be closed and that kind of thing. Some boards are even looking at one course at a time, which would be like a summer school model where the kids do it for roughly a month at a time. They take one course and then they just move on to the next one till they've completed 8 throughout the year.
What about university students? Basically, from what I'm hearing, it's remote learning, but they're still paying full tuition. I mean, that sounds really unfair. And my other big question is, what about Frosh Week?
So I have a daughter in grade 12 who just finished grade 12. And actually, Frosh Week has been her big question too, right? Not just because it's fun, but it's sort of that first week of bonding and meeting friends. And I think there's a real sense of loss for kids going into university that they won't have that experience, at least not in the fall. Universities generally are planning for online or maybe a mix, depending. Some courses like nursing or health sciences where they need hands-on lab work, they may be able to go in. Some universities are opening up their residences with one kid per room. Others, are trying to limit it to international students and maybe students who live up north who don't have access to Wi-Fi, that kind of thing. But yes, the tuition question. So students don't think they should be paying full tuition for online learning. A recent poll for the Star found that I think about 3/4 of Ontarians thought it was unfair to charge kids full tuition for the online learning because, there's that, you're missing out on the campus experience, which includes Frosh Week. And they just don't think that, to pay $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year is fair.
I would agree. Here's the other thing, Kris. You know me. I love bars. They're about to reopen. But it feels like the government is getting a lot of pressure for prioritizing business reopening as opposed to focusing on schools. Are they starting to feel that?
I think they are. I think certainly the motion brought by 2 Toronto District School Board trustees for the province to provide some clarity and for boards to look at, other scenarios such as getting extra space and that kind of thing so that kids can go back to school full time and parents can work full time. That's kind of up the pressure. And the province is certainly hearing from areas where there's hardly any COVID cases and they're saying, why can't we just reopen? So there's a lot of moving parts here. I think for the government, they're looking to the medical officer of health. They've said, we're only going to do what's safe, learn from other jurisdictions that have opened up and try and make it as safe as possible for kids. And, in fairness, polling has showed that parents do feel very mixed about sending their kids back. So I think this is a tough call for the government. They're obviously going to err on the side of safety all the time.
I'm not sure about how remote learning worked with you and your kids, but my review from this past semester was not very good. Any word on plans on how to improve that?
Okay, there were so many tears at my house over online learning. I cannot even tell you. It was just an exercise in frustration for my kids for the most part. So when school shut down, everything had to be moved online. It was a huge rush. A lot of, teachers, obviously schools were not prepared for this. So I think the learning that went on from March until June maybe was not the best. I think things got a little bit better as it went along. Boards now have a bit of time to plan. What they're saying is, and what the education minister has said is he talked a lot about synchronous learning. So that's like a live video conference or a Google Hangout, some kind of live contact between teacher and students. The TDSB plan for the fall says if it's going to be online learning, look, you have to have these live events. You have to teach a live class a couple of times a day. You have to check in with kids. So they've actually built that into their plan because I think they did realize that online learning was difficult for many. The technology issue aside, it is difficult. It's not for all kids. And that's why that they, I think, are looking ahead to make it as easy as possible if that's the option you have to have.
What is on the table here? Right now, there's all this talk about potentially hiring a bunch of more staff in the short term. The scary one to me is potentially cutting French programs. My daughter is in French immersion. This is something they've promised all kids here if you want to take it. One, what are we looking at cost-wise, but also what is the government really willing to do? Is it all on the table?
So at the moment, the boards are looking for funding for these things. So if classes have to be smaller, let's say 15 students, the Toronto board would have to hire a lot more teachers. If they go down to their 15, 20 student model, I think they've said they need 200 extra teachers, which is $20 million. That's Canada's largest board, but it's usually roughly 1/10 of what boards need. So it's a lot of money that the government has not pledged as yet. The custodial union saying, look, we need more people. If you want deep cleaning every day, we just don't have the staff. Some boards, their cleaning protocols don't even allow for cleaning of classrooms every day. It might be every other day. So you would need double the staff in that case. That funding has not come through yet. As for the French programs, the issue for boards is that there is a shortage of French teachers, period. right? And there's a huge demand for French. So they're saying if we have to cut the classes to 15, we just don't have the teachers. Like, it's practical. We just can't manage the French, the extended French, the core French, and French immersion at the levels we have them if the classes are much smaller. There may be some creative solutions to that. I don't know. But at the moment, they're saying that that is just not feasible.
Where should we be looking from other jurisdictions that have reopened, and what can we learn and steal from them?
Well, other jurisdictions, I mean, you can even look to Quebec, which opened up. They had kids going back to school. I think about 50% of kids showed up to school. There were a couple of outbreaks. They were saying some of the cases came from outside the school. They practiced physical distancing. There were bubbles. They're talking about in the fall having bubbles of 6 kids at a time. So it's like their social bubble. They can be close together. They don't have to physical distance. So these are the kind of things that we've learned from other jurisdictions, outdoor learning as often as possible, right? Because the transmission is said to be much lower outdoors. The particular issues to Ontario schools is a lot of the infrastructure. The buildings are old. The ventilation is not great. If I look at my own kids' public school, their elementary school, the sinks didn't even work in the washroom, and kids are going to have to be washing their hands a lot more. I mean, that's another protocol that's worked really well. Kids washing their hands 5 times a day, hand sanitizer at the door of every classroom. But that all takes money as well, and boards are saying it's not there right now.
We got to talk about some of the fallout from this. I think that there's already been some stuff written about how this is going to primarily affect women, as they remain primarily the main caregivers in most homes. There's been some reports about women leaving or planning to leave their jobs to take care of their children. Are you hearing this?
Yes, definitely. And certainly that was the impetus behind the motion from the 2 Toronto trustees to say, hey, look, let's see if there's a way we can be creative and get kids back to school full time, because it is their moms who are going to bear the brunt of it. I mean, I know personally, I have friends with younger kids who've curtailed their hours at work, or they work later into the night because they have to take breaks during the day in order to supervise their kids, especially if the kids are younger. So it is an issue that's disproportionately hitting women, I think. And certainly the Toronto board is trying to address that with the return, hopefully, full time.
You've been talking to some TDSB directors recently. What are they saying? Any concerns, or, are they just trying to figure this out?
You know what? They're trying to figure this out. It is a huge issue and it's complex. There's not a lot of time. And every time you talk about one scenario, it raises all kinds of questions. If classes go down to 15, a lot of schools don't have space. Where do you put the extra kids? And where do you find that extra space? How do you secure that extra space by September? How are the kids getting to and from that extra space? Do you have a vice principal on site? There's just all kinds of questions that every scenario raises, even if kids return to school full time. Does everybody wear masks? The board has said maybe if physical distancing is not possible. Do teachers wear masks? And what about teachers who, maybe have compromised immune systems or family members who are vulnerable? How do they feel about returning to work? And what do they do if they don't return to work? Are they sort of centrally assigned and they'll be running online courses? Because all the boards are giving parents, obviously, the option of opting out of in-class entirely, and then they will provide online learning.
That is one of the stats I want to talk about. And you mentioned it. I think I saw something about 53% of parents would be concerned about sending their kids back, depending on what the conditions it is, and they're keeping their kids home and safe. I guess this is one of these things. It feels like I'm going to be a bit of a Sophie's choice for everybody. Is that fair to say? I want my kid to go back to school because I know she's missing it. And she's missing all of the social things that come along with it. But if it's not safe, I'm not sending her back for sure.
I think that's how most parents feel. They really have seen how the shutdown has affected their kids. They feel isolated from their friends. Sitting at home in front of a computer all day doing schoolwork, it's not fun, right? It's really not. And it doesn't replace the dynamic of a classroom. My kids really miss their teachers. Just being in a classroom, they really miss that. But that said, I think people really are worried about COVID-19. Whether or not kids are bigger transmitters than others and whatnot, people are still concerned about anybody contracting it or kids bringing it home. Teachers are worried about that as well. So I think on the one hand, parents really do want their kids to be back in school, but only if it can be safe because of all these other worries.
Some of the plans also just really didn't sound very realistic, in the sense of a kid going to school and sitting at their desk for 8 hours and not moving.
Yeah, or kids not running around with each other and playing at recess, right? Physical distancing at recess, just not possible. Even Sick Kids in their report with their recommendations on reopening schools, they said not even face masks because they didn't think for younger kids especially that was even going to work because they touch their faces, they'd be playing around with the masks, maybe they'd take them off. And what do they do at meal times and that kind of thing? So a lot of things aren't workable. I mean, I even think of my teenagers going back to school. I mean, they're not going to stay away from their friends. Realistically, they're not. They're all going to be hanging out, either on the school grounds if they can't in the hallway. So it does pose a lot of challenges. And again, that's why it's been so difficult for boards to kind of figure out the best way forward.
Do you think the province is looking for a one-size-fits-all solution, or will it be a board-by-board decision?
So the province heard quite clearly from boards that they didn't want a one-size-fits-all because, if you look at Toronto or Peel where there are the most cases, or if you look up north where maybe there are a few cases, or even east to Kingston, I mean, apart from the recent outbreak from the nail salon in Kingston, Kingston's been great. I mean, they've had a very few cases of COVID. So the boards there were kind of saying, we should be able to open up a little bit more if we want. So the province did respond to that and said to the boards, plan for these 3 scenarios, and then you kind of pick which one is best for your area. The criticism of that is that you're going to have a patchwork across the province. So yes, boards get the flexibility to do what they want. But, in Toronto, you could have kids learning online, which no one is really a huge fan of. Whereas in Kingston, everybody could be in class full time. Is that fair? Is that right? I don't know. But that is the concern that has been raised.
I think the other thing is going to be, there's so many other factors. I mean, at my kids' school next year, they were talking about having an early start time, an earlier dismissal. But then, of course, I haven't been able to sign her up for the after-school programs. There's also all these domino effects that we still have to wait for to make plans for our kids. And aren't we running out of time?
So the directors I've spoken to say that it's a pretty tight timeline. They think if they had to hire teachers, extra teachers in the next 5 or 6 weeks, they could probably do that because, there haven't been a lot of jobs for teachers in recent years and there's still been a lot of graduates. So they have pretty big supply teacher lists. They don't think that's the issue. But it is the planning, right? Is there even room in schools for the daycares anymore? Should the daycares have to expand because of the care that they need? Will there be spots for kids for after school programs? Will they be allowed? I mean, these are all things that boards are grappling with. But as you say, parents do need to know. And I think sooner rather than later. And I do think the government is feeling a lot of pressure on that front.
I think I saw that August 4th was sort of the date for the TDSB to have a big meeting about this. What are the dates that we should be paying attention to?
So the Toronto board has released its plan. It's a draft plan. It went to Toronto Public Health and out for discussion with parents. I mean, every board has surveyed parents. Other boards have put out sort of tentative plans. The Toronto Catholic Board last week talked about the alternating weeks, 1 week on, 1 week off. Boards have to have their plans into the ministry by August the 4th. That said, the province has sort of indicated that there may be announcements coming up in the next week or so. Whether or not that will provide boards with a bit more direction, I don't know. But at the moment, they're working on the August 4th deadline, and parents will know after that.
Any thoughts on how you think it's going to play out?
It all depends on the number of cases. I think in the end, if there is going to be a hybrid, which it's sort of looking like it will be, there has to be some kind of childcare in place for kids for when they're not in school. And how you work that out, I don't know. For me with teenagers, if it's a hybrid model, it's not as big a deal. They can, I will have to nag them still, but, I don't have to supervise them all day. So the issue really is at the elementary level and how you help parents manage their work and the kids if everyone's at home, even if it's part-time.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing that we've been trying to figure out right now. Obviously, there are no good answers just yet. Kris, this has been amazing for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know?
I think you covered everything. I mean, the only other thing I would say is that the polling that we've seen just shows that parents, let's say even if you take it at the university level, people feel that it's maybe not safe to open up. But if there are enhanced safety and health hygiene protocols in place, they feel a little more comfortable. So, for example, the recent campaign research poll we had said parents didn't really feel safe sending their kids to university residence. But when we asked them about one person per room, online classes, no congregated settings for meals, like no cafeterias, they felt a lot more safe about it. So I think if things are in place, that might make parents feel a little more safe, a little more confident in sending their kids back.
Well, we will be waiting, watching, listening, and obviously reading your work. Kris, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Raju.
Kris Rushowy is a reporter in the Queen's Park Bureau for the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Foso. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.